Here's the thing that I have found with most of our stories. They're not stories we would have chosen. There weren't stories that when we were younger dreamed up or thought, oh, this is a story. I want this to be my message, or I want this to be my testimony that I want to share in the world. Most of our stories that have changed us and transformed us were not stories that we wrote in journals as young children. Yet, today's episode is sponsored by the She is Awakening Seasonal Journal. The She is Awakening Spring Journal is now available, and I couldn't wait to tell you about it. This journal offers a 13-week journey of reflection and transformation, perfectly timed with the season of renewal. Spring is all about new beginnings, and this journal is designed to help you blossom alongside nature. Each week guides you through thoughtful prompts and exercises that invite you to connect more deeply with yourself and your Creator. It's about awakening to your authentic purpose and embracing the life you were divinely designed for. What makes this journal truly special is how it creates intentional space for deepening your relationship with God. As you journey through these pages, you'll discover fresh ways to hear His voice and recognize His presence in your daily life. Whether you're feeling stuck or simply seeking more intentional growth, this journal creates space for meaningful transformation. It's not just about writing, it's about discovering who you are in relationship with your Creator. The She is Awakening Spring Journal is available now. Check out the link in the show notes to start your journey of renewal and transformation. Thanks for being here today. I don't know if this happens to you, but as you know, if you have been here listening or watching for a little bit, you know that I love to journal and write down and process my thoughts and my prayers. And a few days ago, when I sat down to write, it was in the morning, and I sat down to write, and I found myself writing about using your voice and how that's important. So I just kind of started jotting down some notes. But here's what happened that I'm curious if this happens to you, because this, through the years, has been one of the main ways that I have recognized God's leading in my life when things like this happen. So I sit down, processing this out, just kind of writing down some thoughts. And I'll grab my journal and read that. Actually, I'll do that right now. So this is what I wrote down in my notebook the other morning. I put voice. I just wrote voice at the top of the page and said, what is the sound you created me to make and resound in the world? That's what I wrote. That's what came out. What is the sound that you created me to make and to resound in the world? But here's what's interesting. So I wrote that and actually wrote some other things that I might read as I was just kind of prayerfully processing that. And then within the hour, I kind of flipped back in this book and was just kind of looking back at some notes. And I came across another page that I had written some notes. Actually, so the top of this page is, why is it important to use our voice? So I was like, okay, I'm listening. I'm listening. Obviously, there might be a struggle there, some tension. Obviously, there's a little struggle there. But yet, I'm being led to move through this and to work through this and get some clarity on it. So I love it when things like that happen. And it gets my attention because I feel like it is how the Holy Spirit is like, hello, I'm wanting to do some work here. So I need you to pay attention. So I definitely pay attention when things like this happen. So what is the sound that you created me to make and to resound in the world? So obviously you're listening to my podcast, so I'm going to be sharing from my perspective and my story, but it's a question that I want to pass on to you today and I want us to talk about because there's nothing special about me. Well, actually there is. There is something special about me because God designed and purposed me to use my voice to bring forth something into the world, but He also did the same for you. You're special and your voice is needed in the world just like mine is. So that's what I want us to talk about today. Okay, our voice, your voice, is remarkably unique. I mean, it's almost like a vocal fingerprint. And I actually looked up some information of like, what are some facts about how our voice is unique? So here are some things that when I looked up, it said, your voice is determined by the size and shape of your vocal folds, your throat, mouth, and nasal passages and sinuses, and that are all physical characteristics of you as an individual. And voice recognition technology can identify individuals with 99.97% accuracy, making it more reliable than fingerprints in some context. Is that not amazing? Your voice contains over 100 physical and behavioral characteristics that distinguish it from others. And even identical twins with identical DNA have distinct voices due to subtle differences in their vocal anatomy and speech patterns. Here's something that I didn't know. Your voice changes throughout your life. Well, I knew that from like as you're a child growing up, but not just during puberty, but also gradually as you age due to hormonal shifts and physical changes. I wasn't aware of that. And yet I do feel like my voice has changed as I've gotten older. So now I know it's actually true. Okay, another fact is the way you were raised and where you grew up permanently impacts your voice through learned accents, speech patterns, and vocal habits. Now, this is something I find very interesting because I was born in Florida, but then moved from Florida when I was 8 years old and mainly grew up in Tennessee. So totally different accents there. Then moved to Michigan for a little bit, lived in St. Louis, actually St. Louis before Michigan, and then back to Tennessee and been in Florida for 27 years, 8 years again. So I feel like I have such a mix, although a lot of people definitely pick up on a little Southern accent when I do talk and recognize that. But it's funny because then when I go back to visit family, I don't feel like I have a Southern accent compared to all of my family that still lives in Tennessee. But anyway, that's interesting that even if you move away and you live in different areas, that it permanently impacts your voice, which I love. I think that is so neat. Okay, another fact is your emotional state physically alters your voice through muscle tension, breathing patterns, and resonance shifts. Interesting and very understandable. Okay, the last thing is the human ear can distinguish between thousands of different voices, even when hearing just a single word. Now that's interesting, very interesting. Okay, so when I was thinking about the whole voice thing and writing about that a few mornings ago, my thoughts went to this a scripture in Revelation, chapter 12, verse 11, that says, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So I was thinking about that. Testimony, our personal testimony, my personal story, your personal story, it has a unique power in it that few other forms of communication can match. When we share our authentic experiences, especially those of struggle, divine intervention, and transformation, something profound happens when we share that. And so this is what I want us to do. I want us to look at 4 different ways that us using our voice and sharing our stories makes a difference. Okay, so the first way I want us to look at is authenticity resonates truth. Personal testimony, somebody's personal testimony or story, it bypasses intellectual defenses. And I know that you found this to be true. When somebody is sharing a genuine experience that they have had, it's difficult to argue or dismiss that because there's this rawness and truth when somebody is sharing from this genuine, authentic place that speaks directly to our heart. So even if it's something that we have not experienced or believe to be true, it's like it opens up our heart to be open in a different way because we are hearing someone authentically share an experience they have had, and we can hear the truth in that. Whether we ultimately believe that as a truth, that's another thing. But there is power in someone sharing the truth from what they have walked through and experienced and their story with us that moves us past what we intellectually at times believe to be true. Along this line of authenticity, I find it interesting, and this was something I wrote down in my notes a few weeks ago when I was journaling, is seeing how clearly so many of us are drawn to read the Psalms. And sometimes it's for different reasons. I know many people have shared experiences where they're feeling like they need to spend time in the Word of God, but they don't really want to. And so usually if you typically open up your Bible, it feels a little easier and more welcoming to land in the Psalms. And, it's sometimes you're opening up a Psalm and it's inviting you to thanksgiving, to praise. And so I love how it is such an atmosphere changer at times where we can begin to read a psalm that says, like, enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. And as we declare that and read that, we can feel an atmosphere change in our hearts. And it can change the atmosphere not only in our space, but in our hearts and our minds. But here's the other thing that I think is so interesting, because in many of the Psalms, we read and we hear the anguish of the writer. Many times it was David, but I know there are other people that wrote some of the Psalms, and their cries of desperation and at times depression. And I think there's times when we can read those Psalms, and instead of inviting us into a praise, it's a moment of the me too. I feel that. I feel the struggle that you're describing so vulnerably right there. I relate to that. And there's something powerful in the feeling a little less lonely in your anger or your loneliness or your confusion, whatever it is. I mean, there's a psalm that basically there's a psalm that you can relate to where you feel a little less alone when reading it, and you realize this isn't a new issue. This isn't a new problem. I'm not the first person that has experienced these feelings. And a lot of the Psalms it even says it above some of them. They're like poetry. They're like poems and songs. And there's something so powerful, not only in using our voice to speak, but to also to sing and to use our vocal cords in that way, in using our voice and lifting our voice, that changes us in our bodies. And I've thought about this so many times in the last several years, that growing up, I can just remember from a young age of always loving to sing and spending so many hours making up performances and shows and singing. And I actually used to line up my baby dolls on the couch, and sometimes I was the choir director leading them singing, and then sometimes I would actually go stand on the couch with them or beside them and sing. So singing has always been a huge part of my life. From a young age, loved to sing. And as I grew up in high school, I was in special music groups. And it was always a huge part of my identity and who I was singing, whether it was in my bedroom by myself or if it was in a choir or on a stage. Music and singing was a huge thing for me. So then, even as an adult in my life, my husband and I working at churches and pastoring and being on staff at different places, I always sang and used my voice in some capacity singing. And even in moving here to Jacksonville and planning a church over 25 years ago, I used my voice in singing and in leading worship. And it's always been such a huge part of my life and something that I love and has just been such a huge part of me. And I'm not even sure. I'm not sure the exact time. Just a guess. I almost feel like I'll say 5 years. I felt a shift in that of in the singing, and not that I still wasn't leading worship at times in our services and gatherings. Personally, I was not singing as much when I was by myself. And that would come to my mind a few times just because, like I said, music had always been so huge to me. So that would pop in my mind and I would think, that's interesting. Well, so the past several years, I'm not leading worship now in a corporate setting. So with not doing that and already not doing it as much personally, it's like I don't sing as much. And I've thought, okay, this is interesting that I don't use my voice singing as much, but I actually speak a lot more and use my voice. And I've been podcasting for over a decade. So I was already doing that, but in different ways and writing. And I am using my voice to a much greater extent outside of singing. So I've wondered, okay, is there some correlation in that? This is interesting. So I actually looked that up because I'm like, that's so interesting because I was thinking about that the other day. And what I found was there is something to that our voices seek equilibrium and expression. So when I stopped singing as much, and that was how I expressed myself, I felt very vulnerable, but not in a insecure way. And I can remember this from when I was a young teenager, the first time I sang in front of somebody. I remember feeling like this feels different. But even like, I guess now that I think about it, as I'm saying that, even in my bedroom when I was singing, it's like I felt something when I sang. And now looking back, I know it was the way that I felt free to express my emotions and express what I was feeling inside. So growing up, singing in whatever way, but especially it was mainly in a church service, it was such a beautiful way for me to express my love for God, who I was, what I was feeling. The message of the song was so freeing, and I loved it. I loved it. Okay, so here's what I found interesting in the shift of singing less but speaking more is I've changed. And it's almost like as I have found clarity and expression of me in a different and deeper way, not that singing wasn't part of that, but it's almost as I've gotten more confidence in using my voice to say what I actually want to say, and I'm speaking more, I'm singing less. Because there is a difference in speaking and writing. There's singing offers one form of communication and connection, while speaking and writing, it provides a different and sometimes a more direct form of communication. And so I thought that was interesting because I feel that even though I felt such tremendous connection and expression in singing, I feel like my sharing and my speaking is more authentic and clear, and I feel more comfortable and confident in what I'm saying with my words and in my writing. And that's been a process, but I thought it was an interesting side note to connect with this authentic piece and using our voice, of how that sometimes plays out differently. So I am specifically talking about our voice and our speaking voice, but also our voice is our message and our stories and how we're communicating that. So wanted to add that in. So a second way that I want us to look at that how using our voice is important and matters is vulnerability. Our vulnerability and using our voice, it creates connection. When we share our stories of struggle alongside of our victories, we create space for others to connect with their own humanity. A few weeks ago, I say a few weeks ago, it could have been last week. I made a quick YouTube video that I wasn't planning on making, and I was actually running some errands and pulled in the parking lot, and I just hit record, which I tend to do a lot of times. And that's actually how I started out the video of like, I wasn't planning on hitting record. And it seems like a lot of times when I do this, it's like times when I'm not the most presentable and wasn't planning on it and don't feel ready or wasn't planning on it in lots of ways. Not just appearance wise, but mentally and emotionally. But I will find myself hitting record. And I think why I do that is a core piece of my personality is authenticity. And it's like there's part of me that never wants to show up and present this, I got it all together and perfect front, because I know what that did for me for so long and kept me from showing up, because I felt like I didn't have what I needed to show up like I felt like I was called to show up, because I would watch other people doing things and I didn't see any kind of struggle. I didn't see any kind of tension in the showing up. And so that message told me, you're not like them and you can't do what they're doing. And that's not true. And so that day when I hit record, I had the struggle in my mind of like, do you really want to hit record and tell these people what you're thinking right now in this moment, the struggle and insecurity that you're having because you've created something, a product that you want to share with them, that you're really excited about, that you've worked hard on, and you are genuinely excited about it, and you've spent time on it because you think it matters and it transformed your life and you want to share that with others, but yet you have a struggle in doing that. So do you show up and do you say that? Or do you wait till you feel totally confident to share this book, this journal, whatever it is that you have designed and created, until you are not feeling any insecurity about showing up and sharing that? So that day I hit record and I decided to share it because, as I said in that, I feel like we are all more alike than we are different. And I know so many of you watching feel the same thing. And I know that too, because you left comments on that and said, thank you. I feel the same way so many times. And I'm not saying we all need to do that all the time. And we're all called to share and do different things. So there's that. But I think that there is so much truth in this point. Vulnerability creates connection. So many of you communicated back to me, thank you. I feel the same way. So when we show up and we admit our struggles and what we're working through, it's helpful. It is helpful to somebody else that's feeling the same way to know that they're not alone, and it connects you. It helps you connect with that person. And that video that day actually goes along with the next point I want us to look at, which is testimony transforms the teller. Okay? When you share a testimony as the teller, it transforms you. And it really can be, our testimony can be a form of spiritual warfare. And in that video that day, I was admitting how I was feeling, but then I also then started declaring the truth I knew, like stating the fact of what I know to be true, to be an encouragement to anybody that was watching that. And I literally kind of choked up and got teary as I was saying that, because I felt, as I then was using my voice to declare truth, sitting in that car outside of Aldi that I was getting ready to walk into, as my voice spoke out truth, I literally felt moved, because I felt the presence of God in that car with me. And I was being reminded of the truth that I was speaking out and reminding the person watching. Our testimony not only transforms others, but it transforms the teller. It transforms us as we speak out and share our story. Not only does it change others, it changes us too. There's something powerful about when we hear our voice, when we articulate, when our ears hear us articulating our journey, like by us speaking it out loud, it helps us to recognize patterns of divine grace that maybe we missed until we were saying it out loud and retelling it to somebody else. And so it strengthens our faith as much as it does the other person. When we show up and we use our voice, it transforms the teller. And not only does it transform us, but our testimony and our sharing our story, it creates ripples. When we share our story and how we overcome, we're not just sharing a story. You're providing a template of possibility for someone else. When they hear your story and your testimony, your breakthrough becomes evidence that breakthrough is possible for them too. That is so powerful. When we hear the story, somebody else sharing their story of breakthrough, it becomes evidence to us that breakthrough is possible. I've talked about this before on a podcast or video, and I've shared it with my family and close friends that the past few years, I really have felt compelled and called to use my voice in a different way. And one of the reasons was because of all the talk about AI and just some of the different things that are happening in our world. And I was listening and taking all these things in, but so this wasn't something I set out to feel this way about, but it was like, as I was hearing more and more different information, as a believer, I felt a responsibility to take my stand in a different way. I'd mentioned that my husband and I planted a church over 25 years ago, and our involvement in that has been shifting the past few years of what that looks like. And all throughout our ministry, since moving back to Florida, that shifting had been happening subtly, and our influence was greater and more expansive outside of a Sunday gathering. And as the years progressed, we could no longer ignore or deny that's really where we felt pulled to. And it's interesting because when we moved to plant a church, our mission statement over 25 years ago was we wanted to reach unchurched people that didn't want to have anything to do with church. Little did we know that this church girl, that's all that I knew, was being transformed, because I realized very quickly that I didn't know people that didn't go to church. Well, I knew them, but I wasn't in close relationship with them. So our whole world was shifted in a beautiful way that at times felt very hard, because I definitely was uncomfortable many times outside of my church box. But it has been so beautiful to follow where God has been leading us, and the expansion we have seen personally in our own life and in our family's life of what the church really is and what God thinks about the church. And yes, that happens inside of a building and it happens outside of a building, because God cannot and is not confined to time or space. And in our humanity, we try to do that. We try to put him in a box and have him show up here and there, when God is God. And he's going to show up wherever he wants to show up, however he wants to show up. And he isn't confined to our human understanding. And that's one thing that I know in such a greater way today than ever. So as our world is changing, I felt my desires changing of what I was being called to and how I was being invited to use my voice in the world today. Because I heard, and I think here is a statement that I heard somebody say several years ago that I felt in my spirit. This might not be exactly what they said, but said something like, we AI is being created and formed in our image. And when I heard that, and maybe I felt it in my core because it's so similar to we are created in the image of God. And yet AI is being formed and created in humanity's image. And when I heard that, I felt something stir within me, and I felt a responsibility of, if AI is drawing and picking up from everything that I'm looking at on my phone, everything that I'm searching, everything that I'm saying, then I want to be very clear in saying what I believe to be true. I want to speak clearly and loudly and use my voice to speak the truth that I know to be true. Because if this is true, which it is, we've already seen it in the last year to such a greater degree. And I've got grandkids that are coming up. And when they're seeking out and searching things and things are being pulled, I want that information to be pulling some of what I'm putting out there, because our voice is going out there. It's an energy that is going out into the world that is affecting more than we can even understand and imagine. I'm saying this and I don't even understand the gravity of all that it is. I just know that it is important and that it matters, that the words that we use, the things that we say matter. They matter in more ways than we even realize. So important. So that's out there. But even now, you're listening to my voice right now, and my voice, it's carrying an emotional energy. You are getting something from good or bad. I mean, that's why, and it's unique. I think it's interesting how some people can love to listen to a particular person, and other people, it's like they say, it's like nails on a chalkboard, their voice to them. And we're all drawn to certain things. And I think what it is, it's the emotional and spiritual energy behind something that draws you in and pulls something out of you. I don't know about you, but I have been listening to speakers at times in person or online, and I can feel it in my spirit that the words that they are saying, it's like just this direct access that is speaking to me in such a powerful way. And we all have that. It's our voice. You right now listening to me, your voice matters. You carry, just like I started out by reading that question that I wrote in my journal in the last week or so. What is the sound, God, that you created in me to make and to resound into the world? Your God created you with a unique voice that carries a unique vibration and energy into the world that creates things. Your words and your energy, the sound waves, you are creating something with every sound, with every word that comes out of your mouth. And when we will walk and live in that truth, our lives will change. Our lives will change when we really believe that, when we really believe, and we don't just say that, but when we really understand and believe that when we open up our mouth, what we say is creating the world that we live in. It affects our relationships. It affects our families. It reflects and it can change our work. Everything. Our voice is powerful. Your voice is powerful. So how are you going to use it? That's what I want to ask you today. How are you going to use your voice to change the world, to change your world? Because your story matters. And you might be thinking, I don't want to share my story. I don't want to share my story. My story is painful. Here's the thing that I have found with most of our stories. They're not stories we would have chosen. There weren't stories that when we were younger dreamed up or thought, oh, this is a story. I want this to be my message, or I want this to be my testimony that I want to share in the world. Most of our stories that have changed us and transformed us were not stories that we wrote in journals as young children. Yet, they are the story that our God, our Creator, wrote before we ever breathed our first breath in this realm. God had a plan. And we have free will, so our choices play into that. But ultimately, our God wrote the story and is writing the story of our life. He had a plan and a purpose that we've been invited into. And as we walk through this journey, I have found that even with my free will, when I've made choices that have tweaked my story, the beautiful thing about God is that He has a way of taking all the detours that we take, all the mistakes, the exits in life that when we're trying to figure things out, our God has a way of taking all of those things and creating the most beautiful story from them. Because so many times it's not all about the exit we got off and what we deemed as a huge mistake. It's not about that. It's about a God that we were created to image and to bring forth goodness and beauty into the world. And however that happens, God's going to be faithful to continue to work in and through us for that to happen. Because God's faithful to us. God's faithful to you, friend. So I want to encourage you today, as you've listened to this, you might have felt some stirrings of like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm needing to have some courage to use my voice in some different ways, and I'm feeling a pull. Don't ignore that. Please don't ignore that. That means something. I think we're so easy to discount when the Holy Spirit speaks to us and is pulling and inviting us to different ways. We can easily discount it and we think that's me. I'm just thinking that. And it doesn't matter. It does matter. It does matter. And I don't want you to ignore that. Continue to surrender and to bring your plans to God and continue to say yes to however He wants to use that. Because here's what I found. This is one reason I love journaling so much and writing down things. And if you looked in this book right here, it's not a dated. I will jot down dates at times. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. I'm just writing down things. I think sometimes we get so hung up on how something appears and the organization of something that we miss the whole point. The whole point is the value of our voice, getting it out, writing it down. And I was bringing this up because just like when I said I wrote that down and then flipped back to several weeks before and saw I'd written on the same topic, something totally different, but on the same thing that got my attention. That's the power in that. So when I was saying you might have felt something today and don't ignore it, here's what I found. God will keep bringing it to your attention because He wants you to pay attention to it. And that's what I love about journaling, is because you can process and you can see that, and you can make note and document of what you're sensing and felt, where it's almost like then it builds upon one another. As I was just looking at my notebook, and I'll end with this, as I was bringing up that point and I had pulled out my journal again, I saw the notes underneath what I started off the beginning of this podcast with, where I said, what is the sound that you created me to make and to resound into the world? I then went on and was making some notes. I said, as I use my voice, my instrument, it will become stronger, more in tune, more accuracy, more control, more mature, and more developed. I think sometimes we think that certain people are particularly gifted, and they are. There are people that have, just like me, just like you, we're naturally gifted in certain areas. But as you use your voice and choose to grow, your voice is going to become more in tune. You're going to be more accurate. You're going to have more control. And when I say that, I was thinking of singing. The more you practice your voice and you and singing and anything, if you're playing an instrument, any kind of instrument, your talent and your gift grows. You mature in that, and you have more control. And there's more accuracy in the note that you're playing. But it takes courage. It takes courage to use your voice. So I want to remind you today that your God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And anything that you have been created to bring forth into the world, you've been empowered to do it. So I love you guys. I hope this helped in some way. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear your voice. The world needs your voice. We'll talk soon. Hey there, beautiful soul. Can I be honest with you for a minute? Spring is here, and while nature seems to know exactly how to burst into new life, sometimes we need a little help with our own renewal. That feeling of being stuck in winter mode when everything around you is blooming? Yeah, I've been there too. That's why I created something special just for you. And it's a completely free guide called 20 Ways to Bloom This Spring, Your Journey to Growth and Renewal. Now, this isn't just another checklist of generic self-care tips. This is a soul-centered collection of practical ways to connect more deeply with God during this season of new beginnings, create meaningful rituals that ground you in what matters, find sacred moments in your everyday life, let go of what's holding you back from flourishing into who you were created to be. Inside, you'll discover simple but powerful practices like barefoot prayers, the forgiveness experiment, and the 60-second reset that can transform ordinary moments into opportunities for spiritual growth. One of my personal favorites is number 19, 3-line wonders. It's a daily practice that helps you notice God's fingerprints in the world around you. When I started doing this practice, it completely shifted how I moved through my days. This guide, it speaks to you like a friend. No religious jargon, no complicated routines, just real talk about growing alongside the spring flowers. Ready to bloom where you're planted this season? Just click the link in the show notes to sign up, and I will send you this beautiful guide straight to your inbox. It's my gift to you as we journey together through this season of growth.